All right, welcome everyone to a brand new deep dive. You know how we all use language every single day to talk to each other, to write, to basically communicate. It's like everywhere. But have you ever stopped to think about the hidden structure behind it all?
Yeah.
That's exactly what we're diving into today. We're talking about syntax.
Ooh, syntax.
Syntax. It's basically like the secret code that makes language work, It's the set of rules, the guidelines that tell us how to arrange words, so that they actually make sense. And let me tell you, it's way more interesting than it might sound at first.
It really is. It's fascinating.
Yeah. So today we're going to explore, how this code works. We're going to ask, like, why does it even matter? And get this, we're even going to touch on how syntax, the way we structure our sentences, might actually be shaping the way we think.
It's like the architecture of our thoughts.
Ooh, I like that. The architecture of our thoughts.
Mm.
I'm already hooked. But before we get too deep, for anyone listening who's like, wait, syntax, what's that? Can we start with like the simple definition?
Absolutely. At its core, syntax is basically the study of how we arrange words
Okay.
to create grammatically correct and meaningful sentences. It's like the blueprint for our thoughts. It allows us to build those complex thoughts from individual words.
Okay, so it's not just like throwing words together in any random order.
No.
There's like a method to the madness.
Yeah.
There's a specific structure that makes a sentence, well, a sentence.
Exactly. And that structure, that order, it actually has a huge impact on the meaning that's conveyed. I mean, we all know that dog bites man is a very different story from man bites dog, right?
Yeah.
But these little subtle shifts in syntax, they can actually do even more than that. They can even reveal hidden cultural biases, which is really interesting.
Oh, wow. Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, for example, right, in languages where you typically put the agent, like the person or thing performing the action, first in the sentence. People who speak those languages, they might be more likely to like attribute blame or really focus on individual responsibilities. So it shapes how they see events and actions.
It's like, wow, the way we structure our language could actually be influencing how we see the world around us.
It's a fascinating area of research, and it's something that linguists are still trying to figure out,
That's amazing. So to break it down a bit, like what are the, if syntax is like this blueprint, what are like the main building blocks? What are we working with here?
So in syntax, you have your basic elements. You've got your nouns, your verbs, your phrases, and clauses. And these elements, they all kind of fit together like puzzle pieces to create the meaning of a sentence.
Okay, so I'm picturing it like this. Nouns are like the characters in our sentence.
Yes.
Verbs are the actions.
That's...
And then phrases and clauses, those are like the scenes,
Yeah.
They give us more context, more detail.
That's a great analogy. You got it. But here's where things get even more interesting. These puzzle pieces that we're talking about, your nouns, verbs, phrases, they can be arranged in all sorts of different ways depending on the language you're talking about. So, like English, we typically follow a subject-verb-object order, right?
Right, like the cat sat on the mat.
Exactly. The verb sat on the mat, the object. But then you have other languages, like Japanese or Turkish. They have completely different structures. They might do subject-object-verb or even some other combinations.
Wow, so learning a new language, it's not just about memorizing new words. You're actually, like, learning a whole new way of assembling those words.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder, if you learn a language with a completely different syntax, like a really different way of structuring sentences, does that actually change how you think? Like, does it change how you perceive the world?
That's a great question. And it makes me wonder, how do we even begin to make sense of these rules in the first place? Like, how do little kids, learn syntax? They're not sitting there with, grammar textbooks.
I know. Isn't it amazing? You think about it, like, no one sits a child down and says, okay, here's the rule for subject-verb agreement. Now go forth and conjugate.
Right. Like, when did we even learn that?
It's crazy. They just learn it by being immersed in language, by hearing it all around them.
Yeah.
Like, their brains are just wired to pick up those patterns naturally.
Yeah, it's incredible. And that's one of the things that makes language acquisition so fascinating to study,
Oh, it really is. So speaking of learning, what about when we try to teach these rules to computers? Like, how does syntax factor into artificial intelligence and all that?
That's where things get really, really interesting and really complex. Because for AI to truly understand and generate human language, right, like we do, it needs to grasp syntax. It needs to understand how those words are arranged, how they relate to each other.
You think about things like, machine translation or even those chat bots that are getting more and more sophisticated. They couldn't work without a deep understanding of syntax. Otherwise, they'd just be spitting out random words.
And they wouldn't be able to make sense of all the, nuances of human communication.
Exactly. So, in a way, we're trying to teach computers how to decode our thoughts.
Ooh, that's a pretty wild thought, isn't it?
It is, and it's not easy. Human language is incredibly complex, but the progress that's being made in this field is incredible.
It really is. Now, I have to ask about something I've heard about, this thing called generative grammar. What is that?
Yes. Generative grammar. This is where, a rock star linguist, Noam Chomsky, he comes in.
Oh, yeah.
His theory of generative grammar, it suggests that humans, we have this innate, built-in ability to understand and generate an infinite number of sentences, even sentences we've never heard before.
Wow, so it's like we have this mental rule book in our heads.
Yeah, exactly, like a mental rule book for grammar. And it allows us to create grammatically correct sentences just on the fly, spontaneously.
That is incredible. It's pretty amazing how we can do that without even thinking about it. But I also remember learning, specific grammar rules in school.
Of course, yes.
So is there, a difference between correct grammar, the stuff we learn in textbooks,
yes,
and how people actually use language out in the real world?
Yes, absolutely. And that's actually a big debate in linguistics. You have prescriptive grammar, which is here are the rules, this is how you should speak and write. But then you have descriptive grammar. And descriptive grammar, it's more about observing how language is actually used, regardless of those rules, those strict rules.
So it's is it okay to start a sentence with a conjunction?
Exactly. And descriptive grammar, it acknowledges that language is alive. It's constantly evolving, changing. What might be considered incorrect today could be totally normal tomorrow.
It's like language is a living, breathing thing.
Exactly. And understanding syntax, it helps us appreciate that.
Yeah.
It helps us appreciate both the structure and the flexibility of human language.
I love that. Well, this deep dive has really been eye-opening. I mean, it's amazing to think that something we use so effortlessly every single day is actually so complex and nuanced. Syntax is a whole world into itself.
It really is. And we're still learning so much about it.
That's exciting. So to everyone listening out there, we've thrown a lot of information at you. But here's something to really ponder, something to think about. If syntax can really shape the way we think, how might learning a language with a totally different structure, a totally different syntax, how might that change your worldview? It's a big question. But, keep exploring, keep questioning. And until next time, happy diving.
Happy diving.